Welcome to the Nurse Mark Podcast, where we talk about everything health, happiness, cannabis. We'll delve into all aspects of what it means to live a powerful, healthy life. Everything from exercise to nutrition to mindfulness, and how to use cannabis as a means to alleviate some of the most common health issues we face. My motivation and passion come from the fact that I personally had to explore all these areas to deal with lifelong depression and mood disorder. For me, it's personal. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hey, folks, welcome to the Nurse Mark Podcast. This is Nurse Mark. My guest this week is Paula Sacks. She's a licensed psychotherapist specializing in adult attachment. We are going to have a great discussion on attachment theory and why that's relevant to your life and the relationships that you have in it. Fascinating stuff. Now, Paula is really a specialist in adult attachment. After receiving her master's in social work, she volunteered at a nonprofit clinic in Cambridge. For 14 years, she provided long-term psychotherapy for low-income clients. In 2010, she was appointed by then-Governor Deval Patrick to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Licensure Board of Registration of Social Workers, where she served for 5 years. In 2017, she was one of 9 authors who published Attachment Disturbances in Adults, Treatment for Comprehensive Repair. This book won the 2018 Pierre Janet Writing Award from the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation and is considered the Bible of attachment theory. Stay tuned, sit back, relax, check this one out. This is really good stuff. All right, welcome to the Nurse Mark Podcast. This is your host, Nurse Mark, and we are live. Welcome to the show, Paula Sacks. Paula, thank you for being on the Nurse Mark Podcast. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
I'm excited too. What a topic we have today. Oh my gosh. First off, give a little background on Paula. How'd you get to where you are today? Because you're in a great place helping a lot of people. How did you get here?
Well, like everything, life is process. And, it feels like you're asking me, how do I breathe? Because it does feel so natural that where I am today is kind of where I'm meant to be. And one of the things that I like to help people, I think I gravitated towards psychology earlier on, and especially in college. And one of the things that always really kind of stuck out in my mind was when I was a little girl, I went to an eye doctor, and Baskin-Robbins was right next to his little, I guess, clinic or wherever I was. And after the end of my exam, he gave me a coupon for a Baskin-Robbins one scoop ice cream. And as a little girl, that was like such an act of kindness. And I know how that made me feel. And that feeling has actually never left me, which is why I think little acts of kindness to people are so important in life.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely. A smile, a gesture, anything. That's beautiful. It's amazing. You remember that to this day. So you kind of just gravitated naturally into psychology and into counseling and therapy and helping people. Yes. That's wild. So you knew. That's special because a lot of times people don't know where they're supposed to be. It took me 57 years to figure out where I'm supposed to be. And I know I'm supposed to be right here, right now with you on this podcast. It's where I was meant to be. But there were a lot of other paths I took to get down to this one right now.
But that's why I'll tell you something. I mean, life has a way of kind of working out. Every decision you've ever made in your life has led you to this moment.
Totally.
So there's really, if we look back, we're the ones who put a judgment on things. Mm-hmm. Because if we look at our life is just experience.
Right.
That's all it is. And we're the ones who either come down hard on us, or on ourselves, or by what we attach to that experience. And we're the ones who put the judgment on it. We're the ones who call it right or wrong, or good or bad, when in actuality, it really is just an experience.
Right. We apply the meaning to it. So what's the meaning going to be? And you're right. Everything that I've done up to this point, all of those paths, the sum total is why I'm sitting in this seat right now.
I agree with you. That's why you are responsible for your life.
Right. And I take responsibility for that. Yes.
I love that.
So we're going to talk about attachment theory and schema and different things within in the psychotherapy world. So I just want to share with folks who are listening to the podcast. I actually was introduced to Paula by my friend Jock, and we'll talk about Jock a little later on because he's got this passion and this thing that he's doing now that's really powerful. In any event, I had a relationship that ended, and it was a meaningful relationship. Like, I was all in. I loved this girl. I was going to marry her. Everything was great. And at the end, I didn't even know who the hell I was. So I did, as I do in all things, I looked back and I said, okay, what the heck just happened? And so I started to do a lot of research. I dug in and I found attachment theory. And I said, well, what is this? Okay, all right, maybe this has something that's relevant to what just happened. So I do a little more digging, and I talked to a friend of mine in Brooklyn, and he says, oh, you're talking attachment? I've got this guy, Jock, who's another one of our EO members, Entrepreneurs Organization. And he was talking about that the other day. Why don't I connect you two? Anyway, Jock led me to Paula, and we work on attachment, and it's fascinating. And I'm just so excited to have the conversation that we're about to have right now, because it is meaningful and relevant in regard to relationship. And oh my gosh, relationships, we're built for it, right? We're built to be in community with other people. If there's something that's not working, especially with me, because I'm the only thing that I can change, right? And it's not easy. I can try and hopefully make change. Yes, I can make change. But changing other people, I'm not going to ever do. So if I can figure out what things in me could be tweaked to have better relationships, I'm all about it. So here we are. So tell me, what's the attachment theory? First off, how did you get involved with it?
Well, it's interesting because attachment is really taking off lately. It's everywhere. I mean, and you're absolutely right. Attachment is all about relationships. It just is. It's everything that plays out with us, because every single person has an attachment style. Okay. And I got involved with it back in the 80s. I was at the University of Texas, and my child psychology teacher said, I need 5 students for a year-long study. We're actually gonna film mothers and baby interactions, and it's like 2 semesters, and it's like a class, but you're gonna actually be working and not studying. And at the time I was like, oh, easy A, So I was like, sign me up. And so what happened, we actually did something that is called the strange situation. And it was where there were 5 of us. There were 2 camera people, 2 strangers, and myself that kind of coordinated everything and stayed with the mother behind a one-way glass mirror into the room where the camera person was filming in a box. So the baby never saw that person or the camera. And there were like different 3-minute scenarios where the mother and the baby would be in the room, and then I'd knock on the window, the mother would come out, the baby would stay, we'd film then the mother would come back in, then a stranger would come in, and all these different scenarios were filmed. And it was interaction with the mother and the baby. And keep in mind, at 12 months of age, children cannot talk. It's pre-narrative. So how they communicate is through behavior. So doing this, at the time, there was a 3-way classification. One is secure, one is avoidant, insecure, and the other one was called a resistance, which as an adult is called anxious preoccupied. So we only had 3 classifications for these interactions. And when I say behavior, so if you can imagine a securely attached baby with the mother, stays with the mother until they feel safe, and then they go explore toys. If the mother leaves the room, the child will be upset, but can be easily soothed when the mother comes back in to go play with the toys. But when you get into an insecure attachment style of these 3, an avoidant baby will go in the room and not have a relationship or an interaction with the mother, but will play with the toys the entire time, whether he's alone, with the mother, with a stranger, doesn't matter. Now that's an avoidant style. And then we have the resistant baby, where was very clingy, and if the mother left the room, could not regulate their own sense of if feelings, and they would have a temper tantrum. And when the mother or the stranger came back in the room, they could not be soothed to go play with the toys. So based on the behavior, then we fast forward about 8 years, and Mary Main took all of these tapes and these strange situations, and she developed a fourth classification, because in these tapes actually showed babies that you could not classify to which insecure attachment was predominant. They actually exhibited both. So she came up with a fourth classification called disorganized attachment. Now, what's interesting about this, every single person has an attachment style. And I can't tell you how many people come into my office and they read a book and they say, I'm an anxious preoccupied.
That was me. I'm going to say, that was me. I knew I was an anxious preoccupied. I read the book. I said, oh my gosh, that's exactly who I am. Blah, 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 blah. Anyway, we'll get into that. Go ahead.
We'll get into that. But Mary Main developed what's called an adult attachment interview, where a therapist can actually give a person, it's 20 questions, and it takes the person back, and it evokes the attachment style of what they would have had, let's say, pre-narrative. But now a person is narrative, so they're able to use their words, so to speak. All right? And what we look for, it's not so much the memories, because the memories only really start around 4 or 5 years of age. But we're looking for the attachment style earlier on, because that's where it was set. And when we do the adult interview with these 20 questions, we have like demand questions where we actually ask them to recall and go for it. And we're pulling for information from that person. And it's not necessarily what they're answering, it's the way their mind is organized around answering the questions with me. All right. So what we're looking for is we're actually looking for coherence of mind. A securely attached person has coherence of mind. Disorganized attachment style does not have coherence of mind. And an anxious preoccupied or a dismissive attachment style has somewhat disorganized of mind. So when I ask a question to somebody, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for quality, the truthfulness in what they're saying to me. I'm also looking for quantity. Is it too much talk? Is it too less talk? Do they stay on topic? With relevant, and then the third thing is relevance. Are you answering what I asked for? Are you being collaborative with me and trying to give me what I'm asking? Or are you just telling me whatever you want to tell me? And then it's also the manner. Is it truthful? Is it fresh? Is it lively? Is it canned? Is it rehearsed? Is it any kind of way? We take that kind of template, and every question that's asked is the coder looks at those 4 things in the answer. And that answer tells us exactly what type of attachment style the person has. And it would be what they would have had if they were a baby.
So you're recording this and you send that recording to the coder. Now, this isn't somebody who's just, okay, I'm going to code AAIs. Like I'm going to pick up a book, I'm going to get a certificate in a month, and then I'm going to go and do it. Now, coding, how long does it take for someone to actually become proficient in doing that?
It takes a while. And I'll tell you, you are trained in it. And then you have to do like an outrageous amount, like 1,000 coding AAIs. You have to actually be trained with the people that were trained with Mary Main. You can't just pick up a book and become a coder. This is actually kind of like a lineage teaching. And you have to actually pass their very high standard, because this really is the gold standard for attachment therapy. When you get this score back, it tells the therapist exactly what needs to be worked on. It tells us that when a person is in a relationship, let's say, and let's say there's somebody who's secure that's with a disorganized, and you can't make sense of what's going on, because we're talking about that coherence of mind once again. And I'll give you an example. Someone who has an anxious preoccupied style, if you're in a fight with them, all of a sudden, they're not talking about what you're upset about now. You didn't put the dishes in the dishwasher. They're talking about what you did 10 years ago. Okay. And you're kind of
I've
going,
been in a few of those discussions.
well, I think we all have. But but that speaks to the coherence of mind, because the mind cannot stay coherent when it gets triggered
on what's happening now.
On what's happening now. And that's why when we talk about attachment style, it's not just a behavior. It's what actually happens to your state of mind when you get triggered. And that's why you cannot really kind of do this work unless you go to someone skilled, like an attachment specialist, myself, who knows your coherence of mind, how your mind operates. And that's what we go after week after week after week. And that's where you see the changes. So that's what an attachment specialist will work on. And also what I also do with my clients is, besides the attachment style, I like to give something that's called a schema questionnaire. And Jeff Young developed it to really help around, let's say, people with personality disorders, because there's a lot of thought distortion. And so he developed a questionnaire with 232 categories of maladaptive schemas. And what a schema actually is a set of beliefs that you believe very early on that become very maladaptive, and they become like locked in. So if you have a maladaptive belief, like based on experiences where you don't trust anybody, well, you're going to manifest that belief through your thoughts. Your thoughts are going to create a feeling, and your feelings are going to start creating your behavior, and that's your interaction.
Right.
So, for instance, if someone doesn't feel that the world likes them, but they want to have relationships, they want to go to parties, they want to be social, but if they get stressed, this maladaptive belief that nobody likes them will start coming up, and that starts generating thoughts.
Right.
Those thoughts start creating feelings of like feeling inferior. I don't feel good enough. I don't feel. They walk into a party. That's the behavior they're going to exhibit.
And that's what I can tell you, personal experience. Absolutely. I have done some other training programs that look into sort of what you're talking about, what statement was put in place at a very, very young age. Mine was, I'm not worthy, I'm not loved, and the world is judgmental. So in the background, not to my knowledge, in the background, that played out in every single instance. Like you said, walk into a bar, walk into a party, and immediately feel like, oh, everybody else here is better than I am. Out of nowhere. So it just runs in the background.
It runs in the background. It's because it's an automatic thought. It's like when you turn on your computer, a picture automatically pops up. Well, it's up to you to change that picture if you don't like it.
But if you're not aware that where the picture is popping up from, you're not going to be able to do anything with it. You're just going to say, "Oh, there's that picture again." Well, here we go.
Exactly. But then you see the other person. Let's say the person who feels good about themselves, and they don't feel like a failure, and they feel like a success, and they walk into a party because they have the feelings of, "I can't wait to get there. Everybody likes me." And they start having that feeling of happiness because they can't wait to get to the party, and then they walk into the party, and they're the life of the party, and everybody likes them. And then you sit there and you go, how did that happen?
Right.
Well, that's how it happened. It started with your belief system.
Totally.
So it's interesting. So when clients come to me, I automatically do an attachment assessment, and then I automatically do a maladaptive belief assessment with the schema. Because it gives me the structure and it gives me the thought of mind. And there you go. And that's what
and out of that gives you the ability to create sort of this pathway of, okay, this is how we're going to work on getting these things to be not maladaptive and get the attachment style more towards secure.
I agree. And what's interesting is I worked with a gentleman a doctor, a very brilliant man by the name of Dr. Daniel Brown. And 11 years ago, I was at a CEU conference because I needed CEUs for my license.
Oh,
And I'm at a conference. And I had heard about him because he worked at, he was teaching classes at the place where I got my master's, but I could never take his class because he taught in the afternoon and I had young kids and I had to go to school in the morning, while they were in school. And so I signed up for his attachment class, and lo and behold, he's talking about this strange situation. I'm sitting in the audience. I see he's talking about this two easy A's, so to speak, that I did back in the day. And I just felt so full circle. And it just was like that moment where I'm supposed to be right here.
Yeah.
And I went to Dr. Brown and I said, I want to work with you. And so we started working, and he actually he's a forensic psychologist, and he worked on a case. And this is this is in the year, 2008. But at that time he was working on a case because what happened was in New Orleans, the Catholic Church in the 50s took their pedophile priests and their sadistic nuns and they got them out of the suburbs and they put them in charge of an orphanage called Mount Madonna.
Oh my gosh.
All right. So now he's defending the people that have, recovered memories, and they're suing. So he did 2-day forensic testing on all of these survivors, so to speak. And he said to me, Paula, let's do a study. I have all this documentation. Let's do it. So I transcribed the AAIs. We sent them to coders. He also did the coding. We have a brilliant study out of it. It's called the Orphanage Study. But what came out of this was the only variable was whether you had securely attachment or if you were an insecure attachment. So let's say there's 20 securely attached kids. And I'm talking about kids where mom and dad had 5 kids. Dad, let's say, passed away, got in an accident or something. He couldn't work. Mom put the 2 older kids in an orphanage because she just needs to get on her feet, but she loves them. She's going to go pick them back up. They know they're loved. And then let's say there's 20 insecurely attached, where these kids were found walking the street with a dirty diaper at 3 a.m. because they live in a crack house. Father is abusive, alcoholism, etc.
Right.
They go to the orphanage as well. Now we have the same abusers abusing the same way.
That's it's like the control.
Yes. And so this is the first time we actually have this. So the only variable as these kids grew up is what happened. So the securely attached kids, they had abuse, okay, which we will call a trauma, a single trauma up here. Right. They grow up and they have depression, they have anxiety, they have PTSD, they have alcoholism, yes, but they don't have, let's go over to what the other insecure had. Insecure was the first trauma, the second trauma being the abuse. These kids grow up with that mixed personality disorder. They grow up bipolar. They grow up and they have all alcoholism. They're far worse. It's not. The trauma definitely sets the stage there. But what really factors in here is the insecure attachment, and
that makes the difference.
So a therapist actually makes a mistake if someone comes into their office and they come in for trauma. And the therapist says, okay, you had trauma. Yes, let's work on your trauma. Well, you have a 50% chance of getting healed. Because if you're working on the trauma and you're securely attached, no problem, you're good to go.
Right. But
if you are working on the trauma here and you're not looking at the primary trauma, this is called complex trauma, things get worse. And they leave treatment and they go look around for another therapist and they walk in and the same pattern gets repeated and repeated and repeated.
Circle. Yeah. And they never get treated really.
Well, you don't get treated in the order and the way you need to be treated. And I'll give you an example of this because Elizabeth Smart, the young girl who was abducted, and she was by a couple out of her securely attached home. Her parents loved her.
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt. She was raped. She was held hostage. She was a young girl.
Right.
And then when they captured her, or they captured her abductors and they freed her, she went back into that loving home. And yes, she needed help around the trauma. That's the single trauma.
Right.
But she had it with the love and support of her family. And now today she's married, she's having children, she's speaking about it.
And I've
She's
seen her speak.
about it.
Yeah.
She's unbelievable.
And it's powerful. It's a powerful story.
But if you listen to the story closely, it was the secure attachment that helped her endure what she had to endure. And when she came out on the other side, she came out. I'm not saying, she came out well considering.
Yes.
And you see girls that have that insecure attachment, they have trauma, and they don't come out so lucky. And that's when you ask me what attachment is, that's attachment.
Fascinating stuff.
It is
Fascinating. So there are a lot of different styles or modes of therapy. So you talked about how you got to the attachment theory and, early on, and then it sort of is continued to be, something that you've just continued on with. And that's like, it's your specialty now. Were there other modes or styles of therapy that you gravitated towards as well, that you found that, maybe help with attachment?
Right.
Let me rephrase the question.
Sure.
Let's say I'm a disorganized. How do I ever get to a secure? How does that, what things happen that help me to get to that secure place?
Well, I'll answer both questions actually, because
Okay, good.
Attachment is not just attachment and we don't do anything else. We also do schema is actually more of a, it was actually developed for, let's say, borderline personality disorder to help with those thoughts. CBT, which is cognitive behavior therapy, also does a lot of that because it really is helping you understand your thoughts. Now, every type of therapy has different, let's say, success stories for what you present.
Right.
So, for instance, someone with like conversion disorder, this stuff isn't going to work because it's so their issues are so suppressed and repressed down here that they actually need analysis to bring that up. So it's kind of like there's a different treatment for what you present.
Right.
Someone who has anxiety, they benefit really well from CBT because it really does talk about the thought process, because anxiety is generated in your mind. Anxiety is about the future, and it's about the unknown, and that's what causes anxiety. Okay, that is the definition of anxiety. A lot of
people suffering from anxiety.
A lot of people are suffering. And the problem is, if you focus them on staying present right now, well, there's no anxiety in the moment right now because nothing's unknown. You're present.
Right.
And it's not talking about fear down the road. All right. And then there's also different types for depression. So there's all different types of treatment. Attachment kind of goes across the board because when you talk about attachment, we're also talking about other modalities. Like when I talk about schema therapy, that's more of a CBT kind of thing, but I love it. And it really does get to the heart of, with these 232 questions, and it goes down, 18 maladaptive schemas. It tells me pretty much exactly what this person thinks their automatic thoughts. And I find it brilliant. So between the AAI and schema, this is kind of like where I work. It just works. It just speaks to, and it's very tangible. I say to the person, to my client, this is the issue. This is what you do. This is what we're going to work on. And one of the things how we do work, and I'll talk about this because attachment, and I do want to talk about the 5 primary conditions for secure attachment. And one of the things that when a baby comes into the world, they don't come with a rule book, but they just don't, and no one ever tells anybody.
There's no user guide for the parent.
There's no user guide.
Zero.
Exactly.
Other than maybe your parents telling you should probably do this. And then that's probably not good.
Well, you hear so many people say, I want to be just like my mother. She was great. Or I don't want to be like my mother at all. I want to do the exact opposite.
Right.
But it's also, if everybody has an attachment style, your attachment style is going to play out in the relationship with this newborn baby that comes into the world.
Yes.
Makes sense? So what we know from attachment and all the work of attachment, this is like decades of research. We know that there are 5 primary conditions for attachment, for securely attached children. And when I tell you that the attachment style is set within the 12 to 18 months of life, that's when it's there. Anything after that has to be worked on.
I find that amazing that it's set right then, and then it affects you for the entirety of your life. Like, this is like the stick in the ground that says, this is how I'm going to be in relationship. You don't even know at that point, right? So finally,
Well, you don't even know. And, one of the things, like, I want to start working with hospitals around this, because when you're a new parent, don't drink, don't take drugs, stop eating this food. Every parent wants to do the best and the healthiest thing they can for that baby. And birthing classes tell you about how to give birth and how to breastfeed, but nobody talks about secure attachment. Nobody.
How to create a securely attached child.
Exactly.
That would be great if everybody was securely attached. It would solve a lot of problems in the world.
A lot of problems.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
But based on the research, we know the 5 primary conditions for securely attached. The first one, and this is so important for an infant, because if this one's not met, nothing else matters. And it's called felt safety. And what I mean by felt safety, I'm talking about the infant's experience that the infant feels safe. Okay? If you're in a safe environment but you don't feel safe, what difference does it make?
Right.
So what I'm talking about is the infant has to feel safe. Right. And the way they feel safe is through the interaction with the caregiver. And I'll just say mother to make it simple, okay? Instead of saying
most of the time, that's the primary caregiver. It's just
most of the time.
Most of the time. I will say, in my experience as a nurse and my clinical training and during the labor and delivery, it's really important that we get that newborn child onto the mother's skin, on her belly, on her chest, as soon as possible. So we do everything we need to do, and then we get that baby back on, because I think it ties back to what you're talking about now. That baby needs to feel that mother's skin and that mother's heartbeat, because, it's been familiar with that for 9 months, right? If things went well. So it's important to get back to that. So we're focused on that kind of thing. And I think that sometimes we're in the healthcare community, when we're doing that work, we're not aware of just how important that singular moment is to get that child back to that mother in the skin.
Well, I agree with you. And what we're talking about is we're talking that the child feels it.
Right.
And the way the child feels it is they feel protected, because they're back, there's loving arms around this person, around them. And that's what the caregiver. And I will say, you can be securely attached with your mother, and you can be insecurely attached with your father, and securely attached with your grandmother. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't just play out, but it does talk about all of this. And the benefit of this interaction and this felt sense of safety for the child, the benefit is that they feel safety, and it goes across all developmental lines, because without that safety, the developmental lines will not continue. You get disruptions. So it's very important. The second primary condition that we know is the feeling seen and known. Okay, now I'm talking about the internal state of a child. I'm not talking about up here. I'm talking about this sense here in your being, so to speak. And this is created, and the way that the child will feel this is because the parent is very attuned to them. Okay. So for instance, it's the behavior, it's the inner state of the child, it's the developmental range. The parent holds that. When the mother will all of a sudden hear a baby crying, she just knows that's her baby.
Right.
Or the baby cries and you're like, what do I do? And you're like, well, the baby's hungry. The mother is so in tune to the baby's needs that the baby knows that if it cries, mother's there with what it needs. If the baby cries, the mother's there to change the diaper. If the baby cries, that's an attunement. And that is huge, okay? This actually starts the process of self-esteem and self-development, and it starts also the metacognitive piece, because it's acted out in the behavior where later on they will use their words to say, Mom, I'm thirsty. Can I have some water? And the mom's right there to say, yes, you should be thirsty. You haven't had anything to drink all day. Or, take your water bottle to soccer. You're going to need it.
Right.
It's attunement that the mother's going to be there to take care of your needs, and the child feels safe in that. So now we've got 2 conditions. All right. The third one This is also important, also with the baby, but you start to see this as we get older into like the toddlers, where the child feels felt comfort. Now, the child feels it. I'm talking about what the child feels. This is when the caregiver offers soothing and reassurance. Okay? If you have a dismissive mother when a child is upset and they say, go to your room, you're acting like a baby. Well, that's not soothing and reassuring.
Right.
Okay? Or if you have another anxious, preoccupied style of, let's say, the anxious, preoccupied, insecure style, and they say, oh, I know exactly how you feel because when I was your age, I did this. And all of a sudden, it's not about the child anymore. It's about the parent regulating their own sense of self.
Oh, my gosh.
So you understand that the child's not going to feel felt comfort if the mother's regulating her own self.
Right.
Or the child's being dismissed. But what we have is we have that attunement where the mother holds the child and says, I know it's frustrating. Because children only have a narrative around 3 when they can actually logically say, I feel hungry, I can ask for food, I get food. Up until then, they're very frustrated. They don't even know how to convey to you, and they're frustrated because they want to. And they're frustrated with the other person not being attuned to what they need. All right? So it's appropriate for a 2-year-old to have a temper tantrum. Okay, because somebody should be able to
that is frustrating. I can imagine being in a position where I couldn't talk or write or say what I want. It's like, come on, I just want something to eat.
Exactly.
That's it. Here
But
comes
if you're raised by an insecure, if your caregiver is insecurely attached, you don't get that felt comfort, that internal feeling where you learn to regulate that on your own because you've emulated what you got. Then you have, let's say, people in their 50s that around disappointment, they start throwing temper tantrums. Okay. And that goes across the developmental lines because they have no way of regulating their own emotional state. And that's what you see a lot with personality disorders because they don't know how to regulate.
Right.
And what's learned very early on. Right.
How difficult is that to change? I got to imagine that if it's been in place for so long, just knowing how the brain works, I mean, that's embedded pretty deeply. So, I mean, is it years of therapy to kind of get to a point where you can do some self-regulation?
Well, it is years of therapy because what you have to do is you have to go back 50 years of mistrust and abuse, and you have to go back and you have to go into the schemas and how they actually about themselves. Where I'm talking about, let's say, a newborn mother, we're talking about that critical 12-month period.
Right.
How easy that would be if you just do it for 12 months and never do it again.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Just do this 12-month period, everything's good. Then you can be as messed up as you want.
Down the road, it's going to take longer than 12 months to go and repair 50 years of damage.
I know.
And this is why it's so important. But the fourth one is really one of my favorites. Okay. And it's where the infant feels valued. Now, this is huge. I'm not talking about cognitively, your parents love you and you're valued or you're important. But I'm talking about feeling it in yourself. And this is created, and this is the crux of it. This is created when that caregiver expresses delight in everything about you. All right? And this is about self-esteem now. And the only way to create self-esteem, okay, is when you have an accomplishment and you link a positive feeling to it. Now,
emotion again.
It's back to that emotion, but
back to those emotions.
It is. But we also know that negative is not the positive of negative is not the opposite of positive. What the opposite of positive is nothing. What the opposite of negative is nothing. All right. So if you're in therapy, let's say, and you're working on, getting rid of all the negative states. Okay. Well, after you get rid of them, you're left with nothing.
Nothing. Yeah.
Well,
because what do you fill it with?
Well, because it's not like when you work on the negative, then all of a sudden all these wonderful positive feelings come rushing in that you don't even know about.
Right.
Right.
How could they? You don't know about them.
You don't know about them. So the best approach is to not focus on the negative, but we start looking at the negative and we start going in and we start doing a positive opposite to it. because we keep working on the positive. We keep putting in the positive. We keep putting in the positive, that as the negative starts separating and, getting less and less, we have more and more of the positive. So we make a mistake. Sorry?
It supplants the negative. It takes the place of it.
Takes the place of it. But people make a mistake to just think, oh, you have a negative behavior. Let's work on that negative behavior. Well, okay. And then what?
And
a positive state doesn't just magically appear.
Right.
Right. So, but this feeling of being valued, the reason why it's so important is because it is your developmental phase. When the parent emulates and amplifies the positive feeling state in the child's accomplishment, the child blossoms. And this happens as a baby. You see this parents, let's say, that allow the baby to, start kind of noticing, the attuned parent will notice the child starting to be ready to have potty training. So they do it whenever the child's ready, not like because their other friends are doing it and they want their child to be as brilliant as the other friends, and they force the child, and the child's getting frustrated and they're in the power struggle, et cetera, et cetera.
It's this. Oh my gosh.
Well, it happens, but that talks about, once again, it talks again about the caregiver's attachment style. All right. But this is the phase. And I will say, and I always tell, friends, clients, whomever, that moment that baby is born. Now you'll remember this, and anybody listening who has had a child, or if you're going to have a child, it's important, because it's that moment where you've waited 9 months to meet this person that's going to change your life forever.
They do.
That second that baby comes out and you see for the first time that face, and you get that surge of love.
Amazing.
It's amazing.
I just got a chill. Thanks, Paula.
You get a chill. But also, if you notice what happens, it's two people that are madly in love with each other. And what the mother does is just smile at this baby for hours. And it's almost like these love rays are coming out of the mother into the baby. And the baby is emulating, because the baby's receiving all of these love rays. And that's what I'm talking about, feeling valued. And we see it as adults when you go into a restaurant and you see honeymooners or lovers, and they can't stop looking at each other and smiling.
So addicted to that feeling.
Isn't it the best?
It's
See, if we could bottle that. There you go.
I know.
It's so easy to do. And I actually have clients who have young children, and I'll say, you do the love rays. When your child is telling you a story or is frustrated, just sit with a smile on your face and send love rays into that child. And you actually can see the child changing, because the child is feeling that sense of a feeling. And it's not about anything they're seeing. It's not about anything they're listening to, but it's a felt sense. And that is the most important thing for secure attachment, right there.
Wow.
Okay. And we can do that. The next time you go out and you see a friend, notice, you look at them with love rays, how they respond very differently. I'll
tell you, Paul, in 2014, I made a verbal commitment to everybody around me that I was going to be love in every relationship. Like any interaction I would have with someone else, I said, I'm going to be love. And let me tell you, it changed every single interaction I've had. Like at the coffee shop, getting a cup of coffee, being like love in that interaction, it may sound crazy, but it changes everything. That smile, that look, it's life-changing. It literally is life-changing.
Oh, but this is why it's life-changing, because it really is. It's nobody will ever remember what you say, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
Yeah, Maya Angelou.
Oh, just walk around and smile. It changes everything. Well, it does.
It does.
I don't know why. It's because when you smile with your eyes and you look at somebody with that loving smile, it evokes their feeling of feeling valued and important.
And goes right back to, yes.
But you made a conscious effort without understanding what you were doing, which is important.
Right. Again, it's all those things that I've done in the past that led me to this place where I am now. That was one of the steps.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree.
And here we are. So we have the 5 pillars. Did we get to number 5?
I have one more pillar, and this one is called the felt support for best self. Now, this is much later than an infant. This is much later for childhood, et cetera, et cetera. But these 5 primary conditions are why people go into therapy. Every single one of these 5. This is where, whether you get it as an infant, whether it's, brought about in childhood, but this is really what the basis of therapy is. And
trying to establish,
Well, when you talk about how you take an insecurely attached person and you turn them into an earned security, because once you get insecure, you can only be earned security after that because you've earned it. You've done the work.
Right. You did the work to get there.
This is it right here. Once you have these 5 primary conditions internalized, we can actually shift you from insecure into secure attachment. And that's your roadmap right there.
Boom. So you have specific ways that you kind of guide people to create these pillars within their psyche, within their person?
Well, we do, because we were part of, there was about 9 of us, and we used to meet in Dr. Brown's conference room, and we used to talk about cases, and we used to talk about attachment and what a client needs. And it was like a peer review. And, we never mentioned names or anything, of course, or nothing identified.
No, of course not. Yeah.
But we would talk about our cases, like, this is what we need. And, what are your thoughts on this? And, it was like when we were learning about attachment and how to do it. And out of this, we decided, there's only really 9 of us sitting here. We should be writing this stuff down. It's rich. Everybody could benefit from this. And we actually published a book in 2017, and it's called Attachment Disturbances in Adults. Treatment for Comprehensive Repair. And it came out 2 years ago. It is considered the Bible of attachment. 975 pages long, but it talks about
a light read. You can do that in a weekend.
But it talks about everything we're talking about. It talks about how it developed, how attachment came about. It talks about how it looks, how it manifests. That's why people will come in and say, "Oh, I know I'm a dismissive," or "Oh, I know I'm an anxious preoccupied," or "Oh, no one ever comes into my office and says, 'Oh, I know I'm securely attached.'"
Yeah.
No one does that.
No, why would they? There's no reason. If they feel that they're securely attached, they're never going to change that. They're going to say, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm going to be me."
Exactly. But it's interesting because even securely attached people also have difficulties at times.
And absolutely.
But what it means is that their mind is organized in a way that they can take things in, and they have enough of a positive map inside of them and enough of these feeling valued, feeling comforted, feeling good, that's what they fall back on in difficult times. People with insecure attachment, they don't have that to fall back on. So when they fall much harder. Makes sense? There's not that little comfort, fluffy thing that you fall back on.
Right.
So when they fall a lot harder.
Sure.
So it's very interesting. It's a very interesting approach.
It is. Oh my gosh. So we've talked about the 5 pillars. We've talked about schemas a little bit. Maybe talk a little bit more about schemas. So the attachment, you work with the sort of treating 5 pillars, kind of getting somebody, into an earned secure. Talk about schemas a little bit.
Well, let me talk about, because schemas are important, but the 5 primary conditions for attachment is what I talked about. But in our book, we came up with 3 pillars of treatment.
Okay.
And the 3 pillars are where we take the positive opposite parent based on the way they answered the questionnaire, the adult attachment interview. And we take the positive opposites and we actually create ideal parents based on the positive opposites of what their parents did or were. And we ask people to describe the adjectives of the relationship, not the parent, but the adjectives of the relationship. Right? And then what I would do is, once I get the coding back, then I develop ideal parent figures and I do hypnosis. And I actually create the ideal parent figures, where I put the client into hypnosis and I introduce them to their ideal parent figures. And it kind of goes something like this, like, these parents really understand you and they really see you and they really value you. And I'm putting in kind of this. And the goal is, when they listen to their tape, because I give them tape to listen to in between sessions, because this is work. This isn't just how do you feel. Okay.
Yeah, right. It's not just an hour with you. It's like, you got homework. When you leave, you're gonna work.
Well, you know what? An exercise bike once a week doesn't do what an exercise bike 7 days a week does.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes.
So they will go back and they will listen, and they will start, because what we need to do is we need to have them link a positive feeling to the feeling state. So that's the work they do. When they come to see me, we do the metacognitive piece, which is the schema piece, which is the, how are you thinking? How are you interacting? What could have been done differently? How is this going? A couple of times I've had people actually stop and say, I'm having a problem. I want to be with my ideal parent figure. So I stop what we're talking about right now on a cognitive level, and I go straight into hypnosis, and I have them just sit with their ideal parent figures to help them regulate themselves. But it's fascinating. So then the third pillar is when I kind of talked about, when I'm giving the interview, is the person collaborative with me? Are they working with me? Are they coming? Are they answering the way they're supposed to answer? Are people coming in late? Are people canceling all the time? Are they not collaborating?
Behavior that gives you an idea of what's going on.
It gives me an idea. So, we talk about, for our treatment, for attachment, to earn security, is you need to have the ideal parent figure. You need to have the metacognitive piece. And you also need to have that collaborative piece with me, your therapist. Okay. And then this is also a template, because relationships, we are relational people. We want relationships.
Sure we do. Wired for it.
When you actually move into that collaborative relationship across the board, whether it's a working partner, your girlfriend, your husband, your spouse, whatever, if you're not collaborating, there's a problem. So collaboration is huge in a relationship. And we teach that collaboration. It starts with me, but then it manifests throughout your life.
Right.
And this is the piece. And once again, you asked me about schema. I love schema. I love when I actually score these 232 questions. It's a lot. It takes about half an hour.
I've answered those 232 questions, and I loved it. I mean, it's right up my alley. That's the kind of stuff I like. The 975-page book, I'm going to read that. But the 232 questions, loved it. Oh, yeah.
Well, what's also fascinating, it's 232 questions about you.
Right. And I love to talk about me. I love to think about me. I'm important to me. So it was really fun.
But you should be important to yourself.
Yes.
You absolutely should be so important. And when you really understand how you think and how you move in the world, and the cause and effect, what you bring to the table, it's not so much about people's behavior anymore.
No.
It starts with you.
It does. It does. When you can let go of the attachment to how somebody else is going to behave, and you can just be you, and whatever they do, they do.
Yeah.
It's powerful. That's freedom. It really is.
It is freedom. And I think that's why attachment is just so fascinating. And anytime I talk to somebody, they get like, oh my God, I want this. Because
absolutely,
it's your roadmap into you.
It is completely. Yeah. And then everything else around you changes. Amazing.
It does change. But if you're going to sit and wish that everybody else, or get angry that other people are doing this, you can already see that that's it's a thought disturbance.
It is. It is.
And that's where the schema comes in, because it really tells us how you perceive the world. And, life, how you perceive the world real kind of dictate your life, because life is perception.
It is.
And you can always find somebody who has it worse off than you, and you can always find someone else that has it better off than you.
Maybe.
But it's all your perspective. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely your perspective. Amazing stuff.
I know you like it.
Oh, my gosh. I absolutely love it.
I think it's great.
Yeah. It's the best. It certainly has enlightened me as to what was driving a lot of my behavior, and especially going back to that relationship. I totally understand how I got to the place where I ended up. And so now I'm released from having to relive that, because that had actually happened before in relationship, right? Because it's how I think. It ends up being the same thing repeated. I don't have to repeat that now. I'm free to actually make a choice to be different in relationship, which is amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. And it starts with you.
It does completely. And of course, finding experts who are just spectacular at what they do. You, of course. So the last thing we want to talk about, maybe, Jock, and love raise. You mentioned it earlier. You mentioned this love raise idea.
Raise.
Yeah.
I love them. I just, I think that, when you can actually, with a young child, if you're a parent listening and you have a young child, if you look at that child with angry eyes and harshness, the child internalizes that feeling.
Sure.
Okay. Absolutely. And then they start feeling like, mom's angry. I need to please mom. I need to set aside my own needs and wishes to please mom, so she doesn't have that look on her face. That starts you down the road for an anxious, preoccupied style, because you're trying to control and manipulate and get the other person, to behave differently and act differently so you can feel safe. And that's just such a slippery slope right there.
Oh my God.
But if a parent can actually just sit and look adoringly, like that lovers in a restaurant looking at each other, the child just blossoms and will start opening up without even realizing it. And the child gets that felt sense of that love. And it's like, it's done with love rays. And I talk about it, like imagine that you're just actually sending rays of love beams into that child, and watch how they just respond. It's like a lotus opening up. It is absolutely beautiful, and it doesn't take long. It's an absolute skill that we should all use, and we should use it with interactions of people. That would be my, if you take away nothing from this podcast,
take away. A lot of meat here. There's a lot talked about.
Just take away love rays.
Love rays.
It's true.
Love rays. Well, I totally buy into the love rays. I had a discussion a short while ago with another entrepreneur friend of mine, great guy, awesome. And we were having a discussion about energy, like, human beings emitting energy and positive and negative, and he totally doesn't believe it. And I'm on the other side of things, like, I'm all Reiki, I'm all like positive energy, negative energy. And I think this love rays goes to that, emanating that positive energy. It's just like it's felt as,
well, because it's, and it's also fascinating because, it's something that's so easy to do. And the way the person receives it is just a felt sense of feeling loved and valued and important.
And imagine it's just in a look, in a smile, in that love. And it literally changes every interaction if you do it.
Well, it does, because you know what? It gives the other person such a great feeling that they're going to respond to that feeling, because behavior comes from feelings. Things come from thoughts. So if you actually circumvent the feeling the thought, and you go straight to the feeling in the other person, and they feel good about themselves, there's no need to think about the thoughts, because they're irrelevant. Right. We're talking about pre-narrative here. Okay? So we're just talking about that feeling good, that mother looking at that baby. And a mother doesn't love the child. The mother is in love with the child, which is why the child has that, which drives me crazy now. Because when I go around and I see mothers breastfeeding and I see them on the phone and talking to their friends or texting or something, and I think to myself, stop. 20 minutes of love rays that you're not giving your child.
Right.
You do that 5 times a day. That child is just going to ooh and ah. They don't care who you're texting
at all.
But you're missing this great opportunity. So that's one thing that technology has come in and kind of you don't get love rays from your phone. We'll put it that way.
You don't. As a matter of fact, you don't get much good stuff from your phone. I've read a lot of articles lately that say it's really not a good thing to be staring at your phone or a screen all the time.
True.
Wow. What a great conversation today. Absolutely wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful. Is there any last thing that you'd like to add, that you'd like to talk about? The floor is yours, whatever comes to mind.
Well, I do want to talk about, because we talked about Jock earlier. There's a
We
gentleman
did.
by the name of Jock Gordon, and he has actually become a business partner with Dr. Dan Brown, and he has recorded all of Dan Brown's teaching. So you can actually go to attachmentproject.com and you can learn about attachment. And if you're a therapist, you can actually do the training and get 8 CEUs, which is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And then he also did another one with Dr. Dan Brown, because Dr. Brown is a associate professor at Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
And he does peak performance. He does it with judges. He does it with athletes. He also does concentration meditation, and he does attachment. So Jock is taking all of these teachings and he's put it on a website called mindonly.com. So not only do you get attachment, but you get the peak performance and you get concentration meditation. So it's
we can surely all use that these days.
We can, and it is fascinating work. Dr. Brown has been working on this for decades, and we finally have it on film. We're preserving his teachings, and it's just going to benefit the next generation of therapists, of clients, of humanity. And
we'll just all get better together. We'll have all of that information up on the show notes. So all of your contact info, if you want to share any of your contact info now, feel free, or we'll have it up on the show notes, everybody. So, it'll be there, available, in powerful. Oh my gosh, powerful. So let's move on to deep questions with Nurse Mark.
Deep questions. What are your deep questions?
I've got one that, and I share this, like the last few podcasts I've said, I got this from my friend Cal Fussman, who's one of the greatest interviewers of all time. And so the question is this.
Okay.
What is the greatest lesson that either your mother or your father taught you?
Okay, that's a tough one.
I've had a lot of different answers. I've had some people say, well, my parents taught me a lot of good things, but there was this one lesson that I learned from this other person. So it always kind of morphs into, obviously, what's important to you. What was the lesson? Was there a lesson that one of your parents taught you that was the most important thing that you learned?
Well, it's interesting because I don't know if it would be my parents, but I will say when I was in college, which I love this kind of time when you're supposed to be introduced to new thoughts and new feelings and new experiences, which I worry today we're not getting that, but we need to be introduced to something different, something new, something that's out of the.
That's what it was. That's what it was. In the past when you went to college. It was stuff you've never been exposed to.
And all of a sudden you walk in and you learn about philosophy and you learn about religion and you learn about people. But I'll never forget, I ran across this book, and it was back in the day before self-help books became really big. But it wasn't so much the book that I loved. It was the title that I loved. All right. And for some reason, this title stays with me. It has stayed with me throughout my life. And I don't know if it's a lesson. I don't know if I'm even answering your question correctly. You can actually say, Paula, your coherence of mind on this one.
I know a good therapist.
Exactly. We can laugh about that. But one of the things that have always just stuck with me, in this book was called I Ain't Much Baby, But I'm All I've Got. And there's just something about that title. Okay. And the book was actually quite good because it actually taught me, which was reinforced with my parents as well, which kind of like, you're responsible for yourself and your behavior. And that's what the book was about. And there's just something about that title that I love. And so that really kind of set the stage like, I am not responsible for how other people behave. I am responsible for how I react, but I'm not responsible for how they behave.
Yes.
And I think if you're going to have a life lesson, it's know what you bring to the table. And for me, that was the biggest life lesson.
And you know what you bring to the table.
Know what you bring to the table and know what is action and what is reaction. Because if you're in action, you're not in reaction.
I use this saying all the time with people. What other people think of me is none of my business. I
Exactly.
use it all the time. And I have to keep telling myself that because it's true. What other people think of me is none of my business.
You have no control over it.
No, none, zero.
Zero. So why would you give your mind to that?
Right.
You know?
Right. Why would you waste the mental energy? Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Powerful stuff. Paula Sacks, thank you so much for being on the Nurse Mark podcast. I am so blessed to have you on today. Appreciate everything that you do. Folks, we'll have all of Paula's contact info up on the show notes on the website. And that's a wrap. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of the Nurse Mark podcast with Paula Sacks. I hope that you got a little bit more insight about adult attachment theory, that you understand how relevant it is in all of our relationships. Stay tuned for the next episode. And this is Nurse Mark saying health, happiness, cannabis.